Welcome, everybody. I'm Chad Koulis. I'm Executive Director of the Midway Chamber of Commerce, and thanks for joining us for today's Economic Development program on a really important topic that is very relevant. I know some of you have heard a little bit about this subject. Some of you, maybe this is the first time, but it's a big deal, and there's a big ask in front of the legislature on it. And the more you know about it, the better informed you're going to be, and that's what we want to hear. And we've got a couple other interesting economic development meetings that are coming up later in March and in April, focusing around housing and commercial and community projects happening along University Avenue. Today, we're going to learn about Reconnect Rondo. I currently have everybody on mute. If you are one of the presenters, make sure you unmute yourself before you begin speaking. If you have questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat. We're going to get to as many of them as we can, whether we do it right when it happens or toward the end. And with that, I will welcome our Economic Development Chair from Sunrise Banks, Terry Baniszewski.
So first of all, unmute. Welcome, everybody. Looking forward to seeing you all turn your video screens on and not just the panelists. You know, it'd be nice to see all your smiling faces today. So we're excited about this presentation, and it's of interest to all of us in the Midway and should be of interest to everybody in the Twin Cities and even greater Minnesota. So I want to start off by saying thanks for attending today. As all of you know, I work for Sunrise Banks and am the Vice President of Business Development at Sunrise Banks, and I know most everybody on this call. So whenever you have a question, please feel to put questions in the chat, and we'll probably save most of the questions till the end. So I want to start out by introducing our guest panelists today, which include Mr. Marvin Anderson, Mr. Keith Baker, and Dangelo. So Marvin Roger Anderson, retired attorney at law and former Minnesota State Law librarian, has been and continues to be a community activist and key figure involved with ongoing efforts to celebrate the past, present, and future of St. Paul's African American community of Rondo. He is the co-founder of the Rondo Days Festival, established in 1983. He was instrumental in the creation of the Rondo Commemorative Plaza in 2018. He currently serves as the project director of the Rondo Commemorative Plaza, as chair of the board of directors of the Rondo Center of Diverse Expression and Reconnect Rondo, an organization with the mission to determine the feasibility of a freeway cap or land bridge of the I-94 in the Rondo corridor. Our second speaker is Keith Baker. Keith has more than 35 years of experience in the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors, 18 years in state government with the Minnesota Department of Transportation. He is the executive director for Reconnect Rondo, whose mission is to lead a restorative movement with a community land bridge to reignite an African-American cultural enterprise district in St. Paul. Keith also served as vice president of Minnesota operations for Kaskaskia Engineering. He was the former president of the board for Upper Midwest chapter of National Association of Minority Contractors and co-founder of Construction Connection to Community. As a strategist, connector, and innovator, he has a reputation for ably seeing the big picture, the connective tissue, skillfully creating, navigating, innovating while within constrained environments. Little known, to the benefit of the Minnesota sports facility, Keith led efforts behind the scenes of equitable inclusion of minority and women-owned engineering and architect firms, strategically positioning these firms to compete successfully on the billion-dollar US Bank Stadium project. And our final speaker is Dangelo Anderson, right? As the founder and CEO of Neo Partners, Dangelo has a radical belief that the real estate industry should serve the small business community with the same ferocity it serves the corporate community. He has been able to work on over $250 million worth of real estate and urban planning projects in the last 10 years, with 400,000 square feet of space in the last 2 years. In doing such awesome work, Dangelo's noticed the people doing the work typically had the biggest dreams and vision. So he's dedicated his real estate career to helping businesses, nonprofits, and local government to dream bigger about themselves, their impacts, and what they can accomplish. Native of St. Paul, Minnesota, Dangelos leads project partners through all aspects of the real estate process, including site selection, acquisition and leasing, due diligence and feasibility analysis, financing and tax credits, municipal approvals and design, construction management, and third-party contracting management. His experiences have allowed him the opportunity to provide tangible project-based solutions for clients without overspending. That's a good expertise to have. Bankers like that. No overspending. So, Mr. Anderson, I will let you get started and kick us off.
Thank you. I'm hoping everyone can hear me, and thank you so much for this invitation to be before the Midway Chamber of Commerce this afternoon. As stated, I am Marvin Anderson, and I was born and raised in the Rondo community, J.J. Hill School, Marshall Junior High, Central High School, all very familiar with the people in the Midway Chamber of Commerce. I grew up in Rondo at a time when Rondo was at its height as far as its intact, solid community can be found. A community that hosted a number of social constraints, social cohesion, a spiritual community, a community that reflected the very best of what St. Paul neighborhoods have always done, is to raise their children, to go to work, raise your children in a civic way, and to enjoy the benefits of coming back to a neighborhood where you can feel at home and where you can rest, where you have put your stake, and where you have enjoyed a sense of well-being, a sense of well-being. Starting in around 1949, under the guise of urban renewal and freeway construction, about 1,200 communities across the United States were affected by this whole process of urbanization and freeway construction. About the overwhelming majority of these 1,200 communities were African neighborhoods throughout the United States. It's been estimated that about 1 million African-American families were affected by freeway construction alone. And despite the fact that there was a small African-American community in St. Paul, we were affected by the construction of I-94 as well. And it's more than just bulldozing a community and disrupting homes. The creation of a freeway also has a devastating effect upon the people who lived there and whose homes were taken. And these policies of displacement have created what Dr. Mindy Fullilove has called root shock, ROOTSHOCK. And Dr. Fullilove describes this root shock as a disorientation. She describes it as very damaging to the economic health and the social cohesion of the neighborhood. The sense of place is gone. The sense of well-being is gone. The sense of how you can cope without all of the physical parts of your community, without your social organizations, without access to your church, without access to your friends, without access to the manner in which you've lived your life for so long, has been ripped apart by a freeway. It leaves a gaping hole in that community that has affected the community for what we now call an intergenerational trauma that has affected the community of Rondo since about 1968. We've did our best in 1983 to start a way to combat this with the creation of the annual Rondo Days Festival. It's a gathering where thousands of people come to remember the old community, to celebrate, to see their old friends, to enjoy a parade and to eat wonderful food. But we have found since 1983 and in the subsequent years that just an annual festival 2 days out of each year is not enough to combat the deep sense of loss that has been created within the Rondo community. And that's why in 2015, I was honored to be a part of what we called a reconciliation ceremony with the people, with the agencies that had done us harm. And in this case, it was the Minnesota Department of Transportation, which was then operating as the Minnesota Highway Agency, and the city of St. Paul, where the decision was made not to take the northern route for I-94, which is along Pierce Butler Road to the north, but to come right down the center of Rondo Avenue and wipe out the core economic and social hub of our community. We realized that we were never going to really get anywhere unless we were able to heal, unless we were able to forget and somehow take all of the anger that we have been carrying for all of these years and find a way to set it aside. And it was at that ceremony, which we call the Rondo Reconciliation and Healing Ceremony, that we heard apologies from the Minnesota Department of Transportation and the mayor of the city of St. Paul. Heartfelt, honest, genuine apologies for the policies that resulted in the destruction of our community of Rondo. And it was from that moment on in 2015 that the creation of Reconnect Rondo got started. And it's because of this project that's been going on now for about 3.5, almost 4 years, the Reconnect Rondo project offers an opportunity not only to build on the reconciliation that we have, but to continue the healing that is now present in our community through the creation of the Rondo Land Bridge. And we believe that the damage that was caused, the root shock that was caused by the construction of I-94 can be alleviated to some extent through the creation of a new Rondo community centered around the Rondo Land Bridge. And to give you more information about that, I'm pleased to call on the executive director of the Reconnect Rondo, which will be Keith Baker, to give you a little bit more information about this project. Keith.
Keith, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
Isn't that always the case? I said some profound words of thank you, Mr. Anderson, that you just missed. Well, thank you, Chad and Terry. And Mr. Anderson, I was just saying that, I always am so taken by, the story and the importance of that story as well, because it really gets to the what we're doing, the why we're doing it, and ultimately, what I'm here to share, and it's the how. So we see this as a larger proposition than just simply about the community of Rondo. This ultimately is about the city of St. Paul. This is about the state of Minnesota as well. And we think that this is about the nation. The things that we think is so important to recognize is Minnesota is both the best and the worst. It's the best when it comes to affordability, the economy, education, and quality of life and safety. We rank number 2 in the nation. And there are many, many areas where we rank number 1. But the area of number 1 that we are less comfortable with and really have failed to really address is being ranked 4th in the country for African Americans. And I think some of the bedrock of our ranking rests also in policy decisions that were made. And Rondo is just one illustration of policy decisions that have not really translated to the benefit of communities of color, but more specifically. But now we know Minnesota is at the epicenter of injustice. And we also recognize, coming now full circle post George Floyd's death, trying to see what the state itself might be able to do in trying to figure out how to create equitable opportunity for all. And transportation is such a critical piece of this. Let me start off by just talking about the quantitative loss to Rondo specifically. And again, not unique to Rondo, but specific to Rondo. 700 homes were taken out through eminent domain, 300 businesses were impacted. Home ownership rate declined 48%. Population reduced 61%. And this is between 1950 and 1980. Intergenerational wealth loss, that 35 million represents the value gained by Rondo descendants at the sale of homes that remained. We did a comparison of 2 homes in the area that currently exist and one that was taken out of comparable size. Calculating 700 homes and the equity gain of $50,000 in a snapshot of time of 1980 is what produced that $35 million number. So when we think about that thought experiment, it could have paid for 4,800 college degrees. So not only are we just talking about the relocation of people, but the very root shock that Mr. Anderson was talking about has ripple effects. We all know the benefit that comes to people when they have a college degree or some kind of post-training. And recognizing that equity was often leveraged to pay for college and other kinds of advancements for members of families. This was completely taken away. And that 157 million that is left there is, if we take the value of homes today and take a look at $225,000, which is the value of homes in the area, times, okay, the amount of the loss, 700 homes, what you come up with is that kind of equity loss if those homes had remained in place. So we believe that what we're putting forward is a technical argument, a business argument, a moral argument, and a just argument. The mission of Reconnect Rondo, again, is to revitalize the Rondo community. But we have a specific lead, and that is creating an African-American enterprise district that's connected to a land bridge. In other words, Rondo had an economic engine once upon a time. It had a community, and we have to reignite and revitalize that which was to build back, okay, that which was and can be into the future. But we can only do it by connecting Minnesota leaders, equity, organizations, and the community as a whole, because this is not just about Rondo, it's about the state of Minnesota, it's about the region. These areas represent what we believe are key outcomes that are in pursuit: economic development, business development, job and career pathways, housing, renewable energy and environment, educational increases, as well as amenities, health and well-being, the same things that tie into quality of life that other communities were able to acquire as a result of the interstate coming forward, but it were not the same things that translated for the community of Rondo. So when we think about the big idea without question is to put back that which was pulled away, to kind of look and set the conditions for the present community, which is a very diverse community, but also to look to the future and putting back an African-American cultural enterprise district that incorporates or can be the igniter, if you will, the catalyst for other kinds of development throughout the area is what we seek to do. So the bridge is simply the asset to leverage. Transportation improvements are going to happen throughout the corridor, so we seize a prime opportunity to move forward. Terry, I'm going to enlarge that just because I know it might not be as easy to see. But you can see that there's a tremendous opportunity when we take a look at the eco to addressing community needs, leveraging again the structure. From all of our technical studies, and certainly the Urban Land Institute provided great recommendations to us. We had a feasibility study that was funded by the Department of Transportation, Reconnect Rondo, the city of St. Paul to take a look at this proposition of 21 acres being created over the freeway. This 21 acres being created over the freeway, we're talking about 32 linear feet at a capital cost of $458.9 million. That's simply for the structure, not the development on top. And then maintenance of the structure and whatever the potentiality is in terms of the membrane on top being 6.9 million in total. When we think about economic opportunities, this slide might be a little bit more fuzzy, but what we're looking at is really adding 576 new housing units. Job creation of upwards of 1,800. That's the construction on the structure. That's construction of buildings on top. And it also includes permanent jobs with retail space of between 87,000 square feet to 108 square feet. Institutional space for nonprofits and or other public entities of on the high side, 36,000 square feet. An increase of revenue for the city and ultimately through job creation and other kinds of mechanisms for the county and the state with a population potential growth or utilization of 1,000 residents. We have a pretty intentional path that we're on right now. As I mentioned earlier, we've done a severe amount of homework. Again, the technical, the business, the moral, as well as the just case that we're trying to make here. And as Mr. Anderson articulated, we've been doing the work since 2016. And here we are today, approaching the legislature for support as part of this partnership. Keep in mind, we've been working with the Department of Transportation, the City of St. Paul, Ramsey County, as well as the Metropolitan Council as our partners. While Reconnect Rondo is leading, typically the Department of Transportation would lead something like this. Typically, the city would be a part of leading these efforts. Reconnect Rondo is a nonprofit, and we believe that this fundamentally should be a community-driven proposition to ensure certain levels of accountability, but authenticity. And so that we don't get ourselves tangled up in what I call the systems, processes, tools, and resources that prevent our ability to kind of move forward. Master planning has got to take place for the area, as well as continued community engagement, and then messaging and communicating with people about what this really entails. So this is where we are in a snapshot in time. We expect to go forward to the legislature post this ask for planning resources, and that ask is 6.2 million, and then move forward to bonding resources, use of trunk highway bonds to leverage for the construction, and then ultimately we get into the development of what happens on top. And so this gives you the recommended phases from ULI, and those recommended phases, we're at phase 0. The next 12 to 24 months, establish our master planning team for the land bridge itself, really take a look at increasing our capacity as a nonprofit with various levels of technical expertise put to the table in order to ensure our highest level of success. Prepare ourselves for what we know is going to happen in the area, matters of increased property taxes and the potential implications associated with that in terms of displacement and or gentrification. What are the mechanisms that are necessary and the tools that are available to ensure there is not displacement and that we're responsibly managing any impact in terms of living in this environment. The other thing is really identifying anchor partners to reside on the bridge itself and evaluating redevelopment plan and redevelopment authority overall. And so that's where we're at now at this point in time. There are a lot of layers in reaching out to congressional members, senatorial members at the federal level. I see this as a project that has found alignment, both at the federal level and now at the local level. And so we're really excited as we kind of move forward. So at this particular point, I think the handoff would be to Dangelo. Know that Dangelo serves on our board and Mr. Anderson is our chair. And so I'm always interested in Dangelo's perspective, not only professionally, but he and I have been engaged in a wide range of things over the years. And I think that there is a tremendous insight that he can certainly offer. With that, I'll stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Dangelo.
Thanks, Keith. There's a couple questions in the chat that may be a little more nuanced on some of the outcomes of the study that you should probably dive into. And as others have additional questions, please drop those in there so that we can keep your brains moving forward on how do we make this a reality. I think one of the things that Mr. Anderson and Keith mentioned that are critically important for the understanding is the timing. We all know that cost of college education from the 1980s has, continued on a growth rate that some of us even question, is it worth what you pay for it now in comparison to what some of our, I should say for me, some of my parents and grandparents paid for college. And at that time in 1980, the amounts that were given around with the wealth kind of deletion, if you will, would have paid for those 4,500 residents. And at that time, that would have been the entire Black youth population in the city of St. Paul could have went to college based on the equity that was taken away from those homes. And so policy is not just important for what it does over time, but in the moment that wealth was taken away, college was at an expense level that would allow the entire city to feed off of one neighborhood, let alone the impacts of 94 and 35 and what happened in North Minneapolis when 94 finally wrapped around. And so these policy impacts create cascading effects for when people ask, well, why aren't other groups doing as well as others? Well, you can just go back to 1980 and see what that wealth extraction looked like in real time. And so I wanted to cover something really quick just to really get back to questions and hopefully some conversation, is that the equity conversation, especially around the built environment, really has to think about the world in a process framework and less of an outcome framework. I think a lot of equity conversations really want to focus on the outcome, when the equity, in my opinion, is really in the process of how you get to the outcomes and how do you build the cultural competency within your organizations, sister organizations, and nonprofits to allow information to be exchanged with community and that information to be captured and built into the outcome itself. So the outcome by de facto becomes an equitable solution. And so not only is there a cultural competency that's required, many of you know, if you've ever done business in more culturally rich spaces, there's a start and stop function to a lot of different cultures, that some cultures are, once you start, you work all the way through. Like there's no stopping, there's no hesitation. But if you go into different communities, the start and stop is the natural course of business because other parts of their life and humanity rise up and overcome what can be considered a daily schedule. And so it reinforces the thought that we need to build out people in different places that have a cultural competency to not just do the process that's set before us, but also have the competency to work inside neighborhoods and groups that have a process of how they do business, how they do meetings, how they do enrichment in a much different way. And this is important for several reasons. Why we already heard about demographic shifts. You know, there was the big scare of we're going to have the job shortage, and many of business leaders in this chamber, as well as others, still say the job shortage is a real thing. But we also have a moment in time crisis that no one, I would say, is elevating at the same time. We recently completed a market sentiment study for the African American Leadership Forum, in which one of the most startling facts that we saw was over 2/3 of the Black population in the Twin Cities, if work for home became permanent, they wouldn't live here. They would find somewhere else to go to live if work for home became a permanent place. Now, we didn't baseline that against other populations because it didn't matter. What mattered is 2/3 of the population said, if I can work from home, why the hell am I going to choose to stay in Minnesota of all places? I think climate is probably half of the reason, but the facts that Keith mentioned about being the best and the worst are likely up there as well for places that I can work from. And so what does that mean? That's a talent change. That's a cultural immaturity of the regression, if you will, for the region versus a progression. But this also, another data point that came out of that sentiment study was really around mismatch. 45% of African Americans between the age of 25 and 55 are planning to either leave their job, seek a promotion in another facility or another company or organization, or start their own business. And what does that mean? That means that the talent pipeline is going to shuffle quite a bit over the next 24 months. And the existing status quo, to the point that Terry mentioned in my bio, the systems aren't built to service those micro SBA non-qualified businesses where they're just starting, they're just launching, they may have the expertise because they've worked for either your firm or another organization for many years, but they just don't have the track record. And so we're going to have an explosion of small business activity that's going to be at a level where the macro systems, I consider macro being white majority led institutions, aren't built to service them. They're built to service more at scale, more established groups. And so what does that mean? That means market share. That means wallet share is going to decrease. That means your clients are going to become more and more competitive with your peers because your new client, unfortunately, is in their nascency and your systems aren't built to service them to actually retain profit and margin. And so this kind of gets into how do you build cultural competency within your organization, and why does all of this show up in the built environment? Is that the neighborhoods that we're talking about that are typically considered diverse neighborhoods don't have the infrastructure in the built environment to service their location. And so what does that mean? That means that the Midway Chamber suffers because new members and new energy and new money goes to other parts of town. And unfortunately, those other parts of town are not in better situations. And so they end up going to the inner ring suburbs, which are great for a region, but are terrible if you're a place-based organization that really cares about the geographies. And so we have a lot of mismatch, not just from a macro demographic standpoint, but also from the neighborhood and micro standpoints. And so I'll leave it with that. I think I said a lot. I think it adds on to what was already said. There's a lot of interest to kind of keep having some conversations. So I'll turn it back over to Terry and Chad so we can wrap up with some convo.
So Chad, do you want to kind of scroll through the questions and the panelists can comment? Or would you like me to do that?
You know what? I'm good either way, but I can take a look at some of the questions first, and maybe we can both take it. But Andy Subaru had asked, is the increased annual city revenue net of the annual maintenance cost of the land bridge?
That's probably for Keith.
Back when
Right,
Keith-
I'll say, so, I mean, I think in the simplest of terms, that might be a way of looking at it. So, but I'll say no, the revenue that we're talking about for the city is just revenue for the city. That's separate and apart from the operation and maintenance costs. So when we think about the structure itself, MnDOT will have to maintain the freeway as they are the owners. And anything that's tied to the structure of the freeway itself and the membrane below, that's a regular maintenance cost that will be borne by the state, like any other project. In terms of the development on top, that's a bit different. Clyde Warren Bridge, in fact, I'm going to share just a quick slide, if you don't mind, just to help to put some perspective also to another piece of the discussion here. This is both this is in Duluth, and I grew up, that's my hometown of Duluth. There's a structure along 35 bridge, Leif Erikson Park area. It also helps with some of the commercial development in the area along in this specific place. But I was going to mention Clyde Warren Bridge here. Clyde Warren Bridge is a land bridge structure that was built to connect downtown Dallas-Fort Worth with the Arts District, or which was an emerging Arts District. And so what was established was a private foundation. That private foundation was able to raise $100 million for programs and maintenance of this public space. We see a combination of that being at play here. So in terms of cost, it's separated from the city's costs, but there may be some partnership opportunities in terms of programming and other things with city departments. The other thing that I want to just point to is just how we've funded other public projects in the name of economic development, in the name of benefit to the community. But when we invest $348 million in the US Bank Stadium, we have to ask ourselves the question, how did that return to the residents of Rondo? Where's the investment and the return more direct to communities? So that's the lens we're looking at. How do we take a look at development and the investment and how that translates more directly to benefiting communities? Second thing, we have the Target Field as an illustration. Target Field is currently over the freeway, a portion of the infrastructure. So we know there's precedence in using transportation infrastructure, okay, to benefit, in this instance, a private enterprise for the good of larger economic development. But again, we have to ask ourselves the same question: where's the direct benefit return to the Rondo community? And I think those are the questions that we have to ask moving forward with any infrastructure and or other development that might take place as well. The final thing, there was a question that was centered on models, financing, and I want to highlight this as an illustration. We believe that this proposition, beyond just MnDOT and investment of trunk highway dollars or other federal dollars for infrastructure, we believe fundamentally the development is a public, private, philanthropic, and people, and I would add nonprofit in that cycle, okay? That we believe that we have to create a new model, a restorative financing model, one with shared understanding among developers, real estate people, community people, almost as if we're viewing rules of engagement. But what we have to do before we get there, when we're looking at equitable development, is first to define who the primary, the secondary, and tertiary beneficiaries are. Because if we don't define that, then our approach and our lens will not get to the kinds of outcomes we think are important for community. Mr. Anderson, you have any comments?
No, no, Keith, I think that you've, if I understand the question, it had to do with maintenance. And I need to, about the land bridge itself. I just wanted to add that the land bridge, the creation of this land bridge gives us an opportunity to look at maintenance in a whole new way. Because as we build the land bridge, we're building it with the understanding that are there technologies, are there solutions being developed in other countries? We've worked with the Scandinavian countries, and we spoke with them some time ago about capturing the gas out of the cars when they're in, which is basically a tunnel, and somehow using that technology to aid in the maintenance of the freeway itself, of the cap. So when you mention maintenance, keep in mind that our solutions are really 21st century technology based. What we have there will be an improvement to the existing technologies, which we can share then with the Department of Transportation and other agencies who can benefit from the way in which we build this land bridge.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Somebody's wondering about the slides, if they can be available after the meeting. Keith, would you be able to send those over to me to share?
Sure, absolutely.
Great.
And we will be, for those on our website. I mean, certainly most of what I've displayed here is on our website, just in the text and the basic body of it. But if a condensed version is requested, absolutely.
Great. So I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'll have Terry ask you some other ones. But there's a question here about, your website makes several references to development without gentrification or displacement, and he's wondering how that would be managed. And that goes to that question I had for you the other day, Keith, about speculators. My concern would be, what happens if there are people who want to purchase the land right next to this development? Then the land value goes up too much and people get displaced once again. And how do we make sure that doesn't happen?
Right. Well, I would imagine there are always, speculators at play with any 20-year plan for a city, 10-year plan for a city, et cetera. That's just the mechanism that triggers thinking oftentimes. When we think about not only what's going on over North Minneapolis, that's a really important illustration of people who have acquired land and sat on it for an enormous amount of time, speculating at some point in time, because of its geographic location, there would be opportunities. So your point is so important. For us, what's important is when we think about how we have conversations with the land bank or other community land trusts, et cetera, that's certainly one tool that's present. But I do think what's important, and what we've done, is taken a radius look of a 10, 15-mile walk to see who owns what in this area, so that we have an idea ourselves what the landscape looks like and who owns what. The next thing I think that's really, really important is for us to make sure that we have mechanisms, okay, meaning policies and or other tools, that either policies that exist or policies that have to be created in order to be a buffer, if you will, to prevent the radical change that can be anticipated through various types of speculation. So the 4P model that I shared with you is also going to be taking a look at that in this sense, that what we're hoping to do is put forward a series of recommendations and or solutions that also tie to analysis of impact, who are renters, who are owners, whether owners live or not. So we still have a lot of analysis to do. But the other thing that I want to point out to in Atlanta, and there is Mercedes Stadium. And Mercedes Stadium, a lot of the corporate people who were tied into the area put together a fund. And that fund generated $20 million. And this $20 million of resources are intended specifically to offset increases in taxes and those kinds of things for X period of time. So there are a lot of tools nationally that we are taking a look at. There's a lot of really smart people here in the state of Minnesota that are leaning in, and we're trying to create conditions where we can incubate and find those best solutions.
Yeah, Keith, there's a couple of things I'd add on there.
Sure.
Just because there's a need to understand kind of this displacement conversation in the context of any place-based strategy that creates an amenity and attractiveness. Other people who don't live there, even if they're not speculators, are willing to pay more for the house than
Sure.
someone who lives there because they see a value that may be different and more fluid, right? And so one of the things that Keith mentioned in the presentation around restorative development, restorative financing, I think the approach that's going into this is how do we get beyond sustainability and kind of be a net neutral contributor to the system and grid, but then also how do you get to a restorative perspective where you create positive externalities for the community around you. And there's like 21 different factors that we had studied with the York group around how do we contribute positively to not just quality of life and pollution and traffic, but how do you create positive change in community directly to the people in places that show up or in displacement, which is income and job creation, et cetera. Because at the end of the day, displacement turns into a people conversation and turns into a people problem, really tied to income. And so how can we be intentional of not just only the buffer to kind of do the short term, but allow the radical change to change the people that are there so that they can now afford the increases in property tax or whatever cost of living adjustments may happen over time, but also their livelihoods change as well. Like we don't assume they stay the same because we just did a physical project. No, their life should change as well while we did a physical project. And the last thing that I'll say that's really key is that at the beginning, and this is the work that the board's doing, as well as any consultant that we bring to the table, is how do we create not just communal models around consumerism, making it cheap for people to like live and rent and buy on site, but how do we create communal models that actually don't conserve and hoard the wealth, but distribute the wealth to shareholders who are able to buy in through Reg A leadership, and not crowdfunding as a generic term, but having community buy into this at lower rates and looking at the models, the NICO model in LA, as well as what's going on in Portland and Seattle. And so I think there's a hybrid approach to one, how can we create the policy network to support a transition period, but then two, how do we equip the folks on the ground to benefit financially as well as they benefit through their health, wellness, and quality of life components.
Well, thanks a lot, D'Angelos. And just let me add just one more thing in terms of Michael's question, the latter part, in terms of the measures. Certainly D'Angelos had mentioned certainly the York report. It's all of the reports that we're referencing are on our website in our resource tab, so that you can dive a little bit deeper. But one of the things that now we're in a position of proposing as we move forward is the question is, when we think about MnDOT, Met Council, Ramsey County, City of St. Paul, and their investments to address and respond to community needs, whatever they are, recreation, job, economic development, whatever it is. The question is, how does it directly translate to building equity for human beings? Okay, how does it increase in a way, and how do you go about measuring that? Well, we do have an approach and a lens of how you measure the building of equity in communities, so that we're being able to kind of translate the investment to measurable changes and shifts. And I would argue the current system isn't able to do that. We invest resources on a regular basis, but we're not quite sure. We think we have the mark, we think we have the target, because we're counting widgets of people that have been either touched, if you will, or services provided. But from a scalable measurement standpoint, I'm not sure that we have the right tools in place to do that. So just know that our lens is constantly looking at this, not only holistically, but from a measurement standpoint, so we can get to answering that question. How do you measure the payoff? What is actually the payoff? Because we can't measure it with the US Bank Stadium, except in a general way. We can in this scenario more so, I think, based on the way that we're looking at it.
Yeah, and sorry, this is kind of where we get into the rabbit hole and we start talking to each other. The entire theory around the restorative practice is that it's not just the value that we have to find new ways to calculate, but we don't truly calculate the cost of what happened. We can only calculate, we're starting to now through some of our studies, the economic costs of missing out and the opportunity cost of what has happened. But we don't know the true cost of just like business as usual. We don't know what that missed opportunity is. We don't know what it's like to just continue to reinvest in a gas tax that doesn't ever increase with the pace of road construction and maintenance and quality. Like we don't have a way, the system, the economy doesn't have a way of calculating true cost of racism, true cost of environmental injustice. And so while we try to create these new measurement tools for social return on investment, I think the reality is we're doing it with only calculating the cost of like how like the inputs of a project, but we don't count the inputs of like not doing the project and it's staying the same or getting worse. And so, I'm sorry, but we're going to go down this rabbit hole if Terry, if you don't jump in.
Well, I'll jump in with another question here from Tony. He's wondering if there's a master project budget publicly available that provides desired projected sources of funding and major categories of expense for the project.
I'll say, first of all, just point you to the Urban Land Institute 2018 report. It does lay out at least a framework of potential funding sources. We're using that report and their recommendations as our benchmark over the next 12 to 24 months in terms of our plan. There is not a master plan budget at this particular point. I will say that, or a planning budget, but I will say we're kind of in a convergence point right now between the city, the county, Met Council, and MnDOT, trying to now take a look at the ask at the legislature. We know where the resources are to be applied, the 6.2 million. We're now developing the schedule, okay, based on those resources and how we see the implementation happening. So we're not quite far down that road. I think everything has kind of converged relatively quickly. I always say we started off on a nice, even hum, and then all of a sudden we've got a trajectory of activities that are just excruciating and extraordinary exciting. So just know that if anything is to be relied on, go to the Yorth report and at least give you some foundational pieces of what the plan is at the highest level. And we'll be shortly bringing forward some of these other more detailed pieces here, I would say in the next 2-3 months or so, because we've got to be able to answer that question as we work with our partners.
Thank you. Another question tied to financing. It's all about that. It sounds like there will be earmarks available again for the first time in 10 years in the federal appropriations bill, targeting cultural and development projects for nonprofits. Are you exploring that as a potential funding resource?
Right. Thank you. So we just finished a second follow-up meeting with Congresswoman Betty McCollum's office. There is this thing called community project funding, and we are seeking to submit resources or submit our project for review. And so the answer is yes. We also have reached out to Senator Klobuchar's office, as well as Tina Smith's office, just to provide them with an update, bringing them in the loop as to what we're doing as well. So we are tracking all potential federal legislation that's happening, because we think also part of the incentive is making sure that we're on the right queue, or even supporting the Department of Transportation, because its current budget is not going to be able to handle one single project, as the funding annually from trunk highway has got to be distributed throughout the state. So we're constantly looking at all the layers and the dynamics, and having worked 18 years with the Department of Transportation, I know the people and the personalities fairly well in the positions they hold. And so we're constantly seeing this as a partnership.
Well, thank you. I think that's the questions we had. I guess I have one question, just looking at the slides. You know, you were showing about development of housing. So when you're thinking about this, is it more geared towards single family housing being built there versus multifamily? Because certainly people can build wealth by owning those single family homes more so than renting. And certainly the mix of type of business that's there with higher wage helps bring everything up. So just general thoughts about that.
Yeah, while there is no, definitive mix except for percentage of housing versus open space versus commercial, retail, et cetera. That's the level of analysis we're sitting at right now. As we get into the master planning, we really see a wide range of variety, but keep in mind that we're also looking at new ways and new types of build, new types of configuration and community needs. Some may be leaning towards co-op models. Some may be is single, multi-faceted, multi-use kind of structures as well. So we don't have a definitive sense of that, but we'll expect that that's going to be surfacing as we begin to get more engaged in community input through that planning process to kind of help us to kind of definitely define it much better than we currently do. Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, before there was a question that Terry had asked about the new Federal Community Act, where we've been meeting with Congresswoman McCollum's office. I just want to I want to relay to you that we were told that one of the things about this act that makes it important are letters of support that we can get that would accompany our application for assistance under this program. And it's through programs like this, Chad and Terry and the Midway Chamber of Commerce, that we look forward to telling you about our project. So in the event you do feel moved to give us a letter of support when that time comes, ask us the questions, because that's really going to make a difference in our application to the federal government. Who knows about your project and what kind of support do you have? And I can't imagine not having the support of the Midway Chamber of Commerce for a project like ours. If you've heard us, you know how to find our information, and all of us are really ready to come back and give you more detail as it becomes available. But having your support would be very, very important to us. Having the support of other organizations, like I just saw Joe McKinney there, the Association of Realtors in St. Paul, Michael John, the Rotary Club. We do a presentation there. I think it's important that you know that we're not just coming to give information, but would love to have your support as we go forward in our other endeavors.
And Mr. Anderson, let me just say, the tagline on our website at the bottom of every page, join the movement.
The movement.
Join the movement.
The
because
movement.
We have a national opportunity for Minnesota to shine, as it has a history of shining without question. And so we invite you without question to join that movement.
Join the movement. Yes.
Well, I want to thank all of you for participating today, and good conversation, good overview. And Chad, it just brings to mind, this is our economic development, quote unquote, luncheon that we've been doing virtually, but it might be something a few months from now we get on the membership luncheon, hopefully when we can be in person and outdoors, maybe somewhere that we could bring this panel back if you guys are open to it, so we can educate more of our membership as well. So I appreciate you all participating today, and Chad, I'll leave it to you for any closing remarks.
Well, just make it really quick. Thanks again. This has been recorded, so all of our attendees will get a copy of it. Feel free to share that with others. We'll be sure to include in an email to everybody the information that was presented here. Keith, if you could send me that PowerPoint. I know you sent me another file to send over. And yes, if anybody's interested in showing their support, please do so for this project. That concludes. And again, thank you everybody for coming, and we will hope to see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.